Welcome to Tabletop Gaming, Plots, Pacing, and Perpetrators, because I love alliteration.
And Perpetrators is just a fun word.
And it's just it rolls off the tongue. So we are going to talk a little bit about designing good games here. We're going to base this on our own experience. We've been gaming for a long time. Technically my first D&D game was back in 1988. So it's been a while.
I started in 1991. We
were on second edition. Yeah, I know what THACO is. Don't ask me to calculate it. I always just made it up when I was DMing. I'm like, yeah, you hit. All right, we'll go with that. But I've also written for a number of gaming manuals. I used to write for Fantasy Flight Games. Back in 2011, we co-wrote a book on anime RPG, how to combine anime and role-playing, because that was, at the time, our big love. We still like anime, but we're not nearly as into it as we used to be. So apart from One Punch Man, I can't tell you what else has come out recently that's not a Netflix original. But anyways, my name is Dr. Sean Cashman.
My name's Sarah Cashman, and I'm not a doctor. Let's see.
I'm not a medical doctor, so if any of you have that kind of, I'll refer you. That's all I can do. So we're going to talk. We actually did not expect to be giving this panel. So
we missed the email somewhere. We got all our mages panels, and we knew we were doing those, and then we found out when I read the schedule Wednesday night that we were doing this panel. I'm like, that looks a lot like the one we submitted, and the description matches. I'll bet we're actually presenting that. Good to know.
So we figured we'd show up, and if somebody else was here, we'd go, okay.
And enjoy it.
Enjoy, but otherwise, we do have material for it. We just do not have a PowerPoint for it, so I'm sorry.
And our notes are at home, so it may not be as coherent as our original design for this.
So forgive us, please. But at the same time, hopefully we'll have some fun with this.
All right, so
let's begin with plots. How to write a good plot. How to design a good plot. I tend to start there when designing my games. That's how I start. So I will begin thinking about what would make a good story overall. Now, role-playing is a game in which you are co-creating a story. But when you're a game master or dungeon master, I'm just going to use dungeon master because I don't like keep referring to both. But if you're a dungeon master, then you kind of do a lot of the grunt work in terms of designing the world and the plot and that sort of thing. So this is where I begin. And so we're going to talk about a couple of different ways that you can do that and some things to consider. So inspiration. We're going to give you some examples here, some of the games that we've played and how it inspired them.
Okay, so we're starting with theming. A while back, we played a game based on Spelljammer, which was a second edition thing. I don't know if they ever remade it for any of the other editions.
Have they remade Spelljammer? Yeah. Oh, come on! It's Galleons in space.
So basically for any unfamiliar with it, you're playing Galleons, like actual ships in space. Like instead of spaceships, you're flying pirate ships. So we basically did space pirates because who doesn't want to be a space pirate?
So I modeled it, of course, a little bit after Treasure Island, which, at the time Treasure Planet came out too, so it wasn't too far of a stretch. So that was the inspiration, I used Robert Stevenson's book for that one.
Yeah, that's a great place to steal stuff from, existing literature.
Yeah, you like this movie, you like this book. It doesn't have to follow it exactly. I mean, in fact, it's kind of cool if it doesn't.
Your players will ruin any story if you try to make it follow a book exactly. That won't work. But you can definitely heavily borrow from plots, characters, other things.
Yeah, we had a friend who tried modeling a game after a Batman cartoon, and we didn't do what Batman did, and it really annoyed him. We kind of broke his rules.
Or his game, like where he thought it was going to go. He thought this was going to be this no-win situation, and we actually found a way around it.
We're like, you beat Batman. I'm like, maybe, kind of.
Another theme thing we did, we played this Ravenloft game because we wanted to do a horror movie game. We were in the mood for that. He ran this one. It was based off of an Egyptian theme. So we took Egyptian pantheons, Egyptian culture, ancient Egypt, and then turned it into Ravenloft, which was kind of fun.
Pull from myths, pull from legends. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. And it's becoming more readily available these days. In fact, there was that one cool podcast. What was it called that focused on myths? Myths and Legends?
I think it was called Myths and Legends.
Myths and Legends? Oh, it's a great podcast.
I enjoyed it. It's got tons of stuff on it. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of material out there on the internet now.
Yeah. All right, and so our third one, you can pull from other modules.
Existing modules. And pop culture. So for the last 3.5 years, we ran a campaign that started because I wanted to run Dragon Mountain. I had the original 2nd edition box, never played it. And so I was like, I'll just redo this and we'll do it for 4E or 5E or something else. And in the process of trying to redesign the beginning, because I thought it was boring, we created a much larger game.
It started as Dragon Mountain, and then it became Dragon Voltron. Literally, there were Dragon Mechs. It was a lot of fun.
It was pretty epic, but it went a really far away from the original starting thing. But you can take existing modules and take what you like out of them, or use them entirely. I mean, they do a lot of the legwork for you. If you don't have time to create a full game, then they give you a lot of material to start with.
But it's a good idea to start with a theme. Start with your location, what kind of genre you're going to be doing. Are you doing a Ravenloft campaign or horror campaign? Well, you think about horror elements. Or Spelljammer, which I highly recommend. Space Pirates. I'm sure there are other things you can do than pirates, but...
Who wants to do anything else?
Who wants to do anything? That's right.
I mean... Yeah, I'm sure there are other sea-style adventures you could do with that, and you just change the location from oceans to in space.
So find your theme. Next, goals.
Yep.
Next steps to pick a good goal. A good goal for your players to accomplish. Now, your players are going to have individual goals. They're going to have personal goals, like, I want to become the best fighter there ever was, or I want to conquer this kingdom. Or I just want to sleep with that innkeeper. Whatever their goal is.
Yes, and that can help drive your game. If you talk with your players and they have this really cool character concept and they want to do it, if you can work that into your game, it can help give you direction. It can help you give you focus. Ideally, it won't be all about that one-player character, but it can help give you focus and goals. If you're doing a campaign, you definitely want this overarching theme. In our Spelljammer game, it was just find the pirate treasure. Yeah. We had clues that we followed. It wasn't elaborate. It was pretty simple, but we really just wanted to be pirates in space, so we were happy. Ravenloft, there was this blood plague that was being spread by scarab beetles, and it was...
turning things into zombies. It's really,
So our goal was to stop that. Dragon Voltron was a lot more complicated. You wanted to stop the summoning of an evil dragon god, stop a war, also collect all the things.
They had to get every dragon mech.
Technically, those were side quests, but they went and got all of them. Hence why it took 3 years. And there were side things, like also save their race. One of the players was a
genocide,
which hadn't been in our world, so we found a place in it, and it turns out his race had been enslaved by this other group within our world, and so they went and rescued them as another side quest. So that one was very complicated. It kind of worked because we both co-ran that game. So we had 2 dungeon masters.
So any game you have, you want to have a goal. And you can create the goal, or the players can create the goal, but you got to have something that they're going for. It could just be, I want to upgrade, I want to go up in level, I want to get treasure. That's fine. Sometimes those funhouse dungeons are great. I want to survive. I mean, we've had a couple of games, like one which was a simple episodic game called Crossroads Hotel, where they got trapped in a creepy hotel, and their goal was to escape.
Yeah. With your sanity intact.
Good luck. So goals are excellent. All right.
But even within there, it's like if you're playing a campaign, you have an overarching goal. Each individual episode of that, so you'll have steps to get to your big goal. There's going to be smaller steps.
Scaffold.
That's your individual adventure. So this might be your session. You're not going to finish the entire campaign in one session, but you want kind of a purpose for that session. Like, we're going to go through this dungeon. We're going to go save this town. We're going to go do something. Like, there's a point.
Every game session should have a simple goal that you're trying to accomplish. And it's great if it works towards that bigger one, especially in a campaign. But in an episodic one, that tells you where the game can end. Hey, you beat the treasure. You killed the lich. Wonderful. Right? So it's good to break it up.
So we're going to talk about our 3-act.
Okay, so that
It's going to lead into our plot.
is going to lead into our plot. Right? Okay, so, all right. So once you start with that, then you can move on to actually constructing the narrative, right? Now, I'm going to use the traditional 3-act structure here. This is a classic structure. It's been around since Aristotle's time. People like it. People go with it. It's going to be varied slightly here for role-playing. If this is not your ideal of how to create a story, that's fine. There are other mechanisms for it. In fact, I think there's a panel later on today.
Yeah, there's another panel for people who don't like the 3-act structure.
Yeah. Is it called I Don't Like the 3-Act Structure? Or don't?
I don't remember.
I don't remember.
I could pull it up in a little bit. But there is one later this afternoon on it.
Shout out to whoever's doing that one there, you know?
So this is not the only way to do things. This is just how we do things.
Yeah.
And it's worked for us for a very long time.
All right, so Act 1. So how do you start it? You usually start with what's called a hook, something that draws your players into the story, gets them going in the adventure. The hook is a classic thing. I mean, pretty much in most books and movies, the hook is like the first 5 to 10 minutes of the film, or the first 5 to 10 pages of the book. It's what pushes the adventure forward, gets you interested, gets you excited, right? What's going on, right?
And I mean, to be fair, this is Dungeons and Dragons, other role-playing games. It doesn't have to be complicated because meta, your players are there to play a game and an adventure. If they want to ignore your hooks, you're not going to have anything to do all day. I mean, they're there to play.
And they
so
know
they're
this.
kind of looking for that. Like, this is what we're going to play today. Like, this is, hey, quest giver.
Yeah. Oh, there's the, yeah, I mean, it can be as simple as that. Just the person over there waving their arms going, help, 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 help. My hair's on fire.
So that pirate game, we found the a member of the original pirate crew, so they knew where the treasure was, and we get clues from them. So that was our hook. Hey, pirate treasure, let's go find it.
Yeah, that was fun. That it was, of course, based on Treasure Island, and in there was the crazy guy at the end that was the captain's cabin boy that knew everything. Yeah, I had that, but he was a dwarf. He was nuts. So he did not give them good information. But he did get them moving.
Yeah, so it can be complicated when we did Dragon Voltron because that was such an enormous game that we ended up designing because, yeah.
Yeah, they went to a guild and they went to the guild board for adventures. And we snuck in the main story quest as a side quest.
That comes from knowing your players. We knew our players loved to side quest, so we hid the main story quest in a side quest board. And so they're like, we're going to go do this instead. And we're like, ha, look, we caught you. It's the main quest.
Crap, can't we go back? I want to go kill the rats.
And that was a side quest they did do.
Our group is called Team Side Quest because they do everything. You know?
Anyways.
I'm going to go chase this squirrel for an hour.
Yeah,
okay.
But technically in that game, the actual hook ended up being an entire 1 or 2 adventures to set up the entire campaign. That was pretty complicated. It's not necessary to do that.
No. So yeah, it can be fairly simple. Like with the Ravenloft campaign, we kind of dumped them into the action. They, it's kind of like walking in Resident Evil 2. They went into the city and the city was under siege. So the plague was already loose and they had to figure out what was going on. So that was fun.
Yeah.
Right. And it can be slow. You can introduce it slowly or carefully through NPCs or other forms of exposition. Like we had a one-shot campaign, which was a murder mystery. And people started dying. And so they weren't sure they were just exploring this town. They were like, there's a dead body over here. Oh, all right. We're going to do a Hercule Poirot on this one. And they had to figure out who the murderer was because there was a serial killer that was picking people off. And so that was a lot of fun.
And that actually ties into narrative structure too. That particular adventure was time-based. He had a list of days, and this was going to happen on this night, this was going to happen on this night, and they were set events. So if we didn't get to the right place at the right time, we would find the aftermath of that, which we could then investigate. But then the goal was to try and figure out where the person was going to be next and catch them at it. So that was a time-based narrative structure. Things happened at a certain time. Other structures you could do for the Ravenloft one he did, the Egyptian one, it was a branched narrative structure. Turns out that does not work well with our group because we tried to do both branches and it doesn't work that way. But for that one, it was like, okay, you can go to this town, you can go to that town. But the way he designed it is like, it really didn't matter which town we went to. We could just kind of do what we wanted. And we would find the clues wherever we needed to kind of help keep us moving forward.
But they treated it like a choose your own adventure book, and they were reading it from
so we were trying to
start
like do
finish,
both.
And skipping the go to page 6 things.
So if you've got a group that loves side quests, don't do this. This is bad. It causes them anxiety. And then they just sit there in stagnation going, but I don't know which town we should go to. We should go to that one. Should we go to this one? Which one's the right choice? And then we get this fear of like, well, what are we missing out if we don't go there?
Do you guys find this? Like D&D, half of your adventure tends to be your players arguing over what to do next. Yeah. Okay, so I'm not alone on this one here.
And we obsess over the weirdest things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta give them a hint, like, don't do that. Stop. No, don't.
You're
explore this train of thought. You're thinking too hard. Just go there. Right?
Yeah.
Just go there.
So other types of narratives, let's see.
So we did temporal, we did spatial, right? Did we talk about spatial?
Spatial.
Where things are located in spaces in the game. So when they arrive there, that's when the story event happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they take 10 days or a week, or they're there right away. Boom, it happens once they get there. It's like a video game.
Kind of. Our Dragon Voltron game kind of ended up being that way. After they got into the initial story, they got a map where they could find stuff, and they just kind of picked where they wanted to go. It was kind of sandboxy in that sense. And it allowed them to explore at their own pace.
So you can have the narrative, you can do it approach it a couple of different directions. You can do what is called a railroad game.
That was actually our Spelljammer game.
That was our Spelljammer game. You go from point A to point B, point C, point D, and it's just doop, 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 doop. I don't give you any choice there.
It was pretty straightforward. There wasn't a lot of variation, but for that game, it worked. We didn't care. We were having fun.
They were space pirates.
Yeah, we were having fun.
Or a second approach is like what we did with the horror game, where you have a branching narrative, where you give them some choices. They'll eventually get to where they need to be, but they can take the left path or the right path. And sometimes it's fun if it doesn't matter which one they go to, it's going to take them to the same place, just giving the illusion of choice, because the players don't see your notes. Unless they're Team SideQuest and they go back, we want to go back and check the left tunnel. Seriously? Crap. You find a toilet. That's where the goblins went to the bathroom. We dig in the toilet looking for treasure. Ugh.
And so, kind of on that note of different narrative structures, you also kind of want to vary your adventures. There's different adventures are made up of encounters. There's different kinds of encounters. You don't want them to be like, say, yeah, you're going into a dungeon, but you don't want every encounter to be kill this whatever it is in front of you. Like, I mean, some players do like that, but most of us it gets tedious.
Yeah. And so you can have the railroad, you can have the branching narrative, but you can also have a sandbox game. Those take time to put together.
Yeah.
And they could be quite an experience. It's helpful, we found when doing sandbox games, is we would start them off in an area and then we would tell them, well, you could go here, and then for the next adventure, where are you going? So we can prepare it.
Kind of like give us a little idea of what directions you kind of want to go first. I mean, so we can know kind of what to have best prepared. Because for us, that's going to make for a better game experience. I mean, they could have been jerks and been like, "Hi, we told you we wanted to go here. We changed our mind," and then they wouldn't have had as much fun. That was one of those things where we really kind of bit off more than we chewed and made the game too big. So there was no way we could have prepared all of it before they got to a certain area. So we had to kind of break it up.
Okay. I think it's good for me to mention Act 2 here.
We've been there.
I know we've kind of dove into it a little bit, but I want to make sure I mention this. So Act 1, you got your hook, all right? Act 2, now in film or in books, Act 2 is where you end up with rising tension, you end up with key events that push them forward. In role-playing games, especially when you have a lot of player agency here, you can't do that as much. Otherwise, your players are basically watching a movie and they get annoyed with that. Well, maybe, I don't know, it depends on your players. Maybe some of them like that, right? But Act 2, in a role-playing game, you need to think of the environment. Think of it as your world, right?
Yeah. So this is where the encounter building comes in. It's how you're progressing towards your goal.
Right. So Act 2 is the construction of all the different places that events are happening or things are happening, right?
So it's what you're doing, it's what you're exploring in the game.
So with a campaign, it's bigger.
Yeah.
With a single one-shot adventure, you're just going to have a small location for them to look at. Like
our Crossroads Hotel, the scary hotel one. The entire game took place in that one hotel. They could explore spaces, try, to avoid traps, solve puzzles, and a few combat encounters.
The hook for that was they got an invitation. Come, enjoy my creepy party.
That doesn't sound sketchy at all.
That doesn't sound sketchy at all. Let's go. They're adventurers, right? So it's a very small area. Let's see here. Yep. Okay, cool. Anything else we want to say about Act 2?
This really is, it's kind of like the meat of your story. It's the meat of your game. You've got your hook, which gets you started. You have your main goal, which is what you're trying to get to at the end, but this is the middle. It's the bulk of what you're doing. In each individual game, it's the dungeon you're going through. It's whatever you're doing for that first part. In the larger campaign, it's
all the middle episodes, right? No,
yeah, I mean, for like,
it really is.
Our Dragon Voltron game, this was where there were multiple dungeons. We had it each one very specifically themed and designed for each type of dragon mech they went after, and so they would go after each one of those. Each one of those was a small section of it. They had its own goal, and but each one tied to the larger goal.
Scaffolded together.
There were role-playing incidents because they were trying to stop this political war, because there was this whole political element to it. So there was role-playing encounters, there were puzzles, there were traps, combat. It was a mix of stuff.
I mean, Act 2 is going to probably be the more challenging part. How do you get your players to go to specific places, right? You give them hints, you can do that. And sometimes you just got to push them. We had one adventure, we had 2 players who were not the kind that actually rushed into battle and didn't really look for things. They were the followers in the group. So they weren't the leaders in the group.
Yeah, our leaders.
And so we gave them this town to explore, and they had no idea. We're like, you have the whole town. Well, what do we do? What would you like to do? And so finally we just started pulling out the random event tables. And that actually led to a really weird but fun adventure that was not planned at all. We rolled randomly on a table. He went to a taco truck. Okay? He's like, I'm going to go get some food. I want to go to a taco truck.
And then, we rolled on, I think it was in the Xanathar's book, for random encounters in a city or random things to happen to you.
And it was, surprise, you're married.
So we're like, okay.
So he got knocked unconscious, woke up in an inn room with a woman, and they were now married. And she was trying to use him she was a scam artist. She wanted to get into a party that required married couples.
So she needed a husband.
And she was basically Ocean's 11ing him. And we gave him the option. He said, you can walk away from this or you can join in. He joined in.
And so they went through the scam and
robbed this whole scam. It was all improvisation, every bit of it. And it was a lot of fun. And at the end, we're like, you know what? Do you want to keep with this girl?
Yeah, well, we felt that, for player agency, he may not have envisioned his character now being married to a con artist. So we gave him the option.
It was not on his checklist.
Yeah, so we're like, okay, for player agency, if you want to continue with this, we'll go with this. If you're like, nah, that was a good one shot, but no. We've been like, yeah, it was not actually really married. I mean, you could have written it either way.
So we had not planned that adventure at all. But it was one of his favorites. And he decided to stick with the girl. And they did some more cons. Exactly. Right? All right, so that's Act 2. Act 2 is the meat of it, but it's one of the harder starts put in. But that's where you put all your encounters, okay? And you spatially put them. Act 3, climactic battle. All right? And this is, this is your climax. This is where they're going to either achieve their goal or they're going to fail. It could be fighting the big bad guy. It's usually a battle. Let's be honest. 99% of the time, it's usually a battle. You can find other climactic endings. That's great and fine and dandy too, but it's D&D. We got dice. We want a battle. All your classes are fighters, unless I guess you're playing a game of bards, and maybe the climactic battle is a battle of the bands.
Or poetry
That does
competition.
sound kind of cool. You know? So it doesn't have to be, but it's usually a battle. But it's where they're about to achieve their goal or they're going to fail. One way or the other.
Yeah, and that can look like a whole lot of different things in our Spelljammer game. So technically the ultimate goal was getting the treasure, but the ultimate battle was when all the other pirates, because this was a bit of a race, there were other pirates trying to get it.
Going after the treasure.
We had this huge space battle, and it was really about having that huge space battle, and that's what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
But there was no other villain.
The pirate treasure turned out to be a big pirate ship. And so when they found that, they were like, oh, we want to use it. And I said, good, because here are all the other pirates that want it. And they had fun with that one. Ravenloft, it was fighting that mummy lord that was creating the plague and stopping him.
Yeah.
Dragon Voltron.
That the climax for that took about 3 to 4 sessions, because it involved, first there was the war, so they actually were not able to stop it, so we had the siege combat, but they also had the dragon mecha and other stuff. That was a mess, and that was like one combat that took an entire 8-hour game.
Oh my gosh.
But it was pretty epic.
They had fun. We asked them afterwards, we're like, was that too much? And they went, no.
And then they had the fight against the black space dragon that was causing all of this, because I can't just do black dragons that are normal, because the Monsters Manual Black Dragon, what are you going to do with 20 level characters that have mecha? They're going to squash the black dragon that's in the player's handbook.
They really are.
So we made something
one of the
else.
kind of weaknesses of 5th edition is it's not really well geared towards the upper levels.
Especially if you have a large group. So we have like
Especially if you have a
10
large
level 20 players. So we're like,
because that campaign, we went from level 1 to level 20. By the end, they had so many powers, it was insane to keep up with.
Creating challenges for that were interesting.
Yeah, pretty much. But then they had that, and then they could form Voltron.
And then there was a chance where at the end it was going to summon Dracus, the dragon god. And then they were going to be able to merge their mecha into this Voltron-like character, and we actually came up with mechanics for that.
Yeah.
We did not end up using them. We actually allowed them to beat the black dragon and prevent the summoning.
Yeah.
Narratively, that might have been a mistake.
Yeah.
Maybe they would have had more fun if we did it. But then there was also this idea that, well, it doesn't matter what we do. It's going to hit that point where we can't stop it, and we're going to still have to do this. But I'm like, but that's not quite right. You actually can succeed, and they did.
Yeah, I mean, it was a Sephiroth thing. It had multiple stages. Like, you beat stage 1, you beat stage 2, you beat stage 3. And so it kind of got bigger and badder. But players like that. It's fun.
It worked.
It worked. So, and this was where you can have some fun with the murder mystery. The climactic battle was the reveal of the murderer, you know?
I mean, that was a pretty much entire role-playing session. There was one combat at the very end.
The murderer, I'm going to go ahead and give it to you, spoiler alert, was a scarecrow.
It was a scarecrow golem.
It was a scarecrow golem. And that was a lot of fun to play out because we played it at night. It was raining. And I was describing this cornfield. I said, you see some fingers come out of the corn that spread across, and this eerie face looks up, and it's this distorted scarecrow, and it laughs hideously at you. And this was 2nd edition when those things hurt. You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it made a great game for level 1 characters that really couldn't do anything anyways.
And what about failure? What if they fail? Party wipe. Boo. Now, you're going to get different opinions on this one. I'm of the perspective it's okay if they fail. Because if there's no chance that they can't fail, then there's no real suspense to it. So I let my players know that, yeah, I will kill them if they don't succeed.
Yeah.
And somehow they keep coming back. I don't know. They're gluttons for punishment, I guess. But failure doesn't have to be bad. It really doesn't. It can be a learning lesson. In fact, we had one campaign. Go ahead and tell them about that one.
Okay, so once upon a time, we did try to play Dragon Mountain once in 3rd edition, and we started it, and we had these characters. I was playing a cleric, And he was running the game, so we had a DM character because we needed a tank fighter in the game and we didn't have one. So he was just playing my fiance. It was
a
the
ghost.
actual character was a ghost, and it was in a ghost touch armor, and that's how it worked. This was like a decade before Full Metal Alchemist, but it was basically Alphonse Elric was my character's fiance. We wouldn't talk about it the whole game. We were like, no, we don't want to talk about how this happened, and we tried to pretend he wasn't undead and all this other stuff. Like he was just a normal guy wearing a lot of armor. And years, like 5-6 years after that, we never finished that game, but we went and did a prequel. So we pulled those characters out, we played them at lower level, and he wasn't undead. Well, the end of the game, there was a conflict of moral interests. My character, the cleric, got really mad at the party and walked off. Like, okay, I'm not going with you in here. I think this is morally wrong. I left.
Then the party wiped.
Including him.
Well,
my character felt awful. Hence why she didn't want to talk about it in the next game ever. Like, this was really traumatizing for her. So, and those of us,
it was great.
Narratively, it worked out being really great. And those who had played the original game, and they're like, wow, that was the perfect arc for those two characters. That really ended up working out.
They were still bummed out that their characters died.
There were a couple people who were not part of that who, like one of them that was particularly responsible for the party wipe because he put the evil artifact, like it was this crown thing. And I was like, well, it's radiating evil energy. What do you do? I put it on my head. Well, it took over his character, gave him superpowers, and he murdered the party. And he was not happy with that. We felt like it was very clearly foreshadowed that you really don't want to put this very evil thing on
your head. You see evil radiating from it, and you're not even a paladin. It's got blood dripping down it. It's got baby's teeth around it. Come on, it's evil. I put it on my head. We were playing with a loon.
Like, are you sure?
Are you sure? You want to eat out of it first?
Like, I feel like if you're a dungeon master and you ask, are you sure? With that like tone of voice, and they ignore it, it's kind of fair to kill them.
They deserve
after
whatever
that.
they get at that point because they want to hear it. Yep. Question.
With the failure thing, I think a lot of people are afraid of it. But honestly, I've had a campaign that failed. Like, well, they succeeded, but then they immediately got killed by something else.
Oh.
It set up a cool, like, almost mythology around these like level 20 characters who were basically gods among us and just disappeared one day.
Yeah.
A sequel with that.
So
use it narratively.
Yeah, that's a fair point. It's like, I think what happens with failure is how your group takes it and what you do with it. Like, for those of us who are okay with that one arc, they're like, okay, that kind of sucked, and it was a really crappy way to end that game, but it really set up the perfect arc for where these characters ended up going. But yeah.
All right, so before we get into Perpetrators, part of the whole, I do need to take a moment to talk about two key concepts in terms of storytelling. One is exposition, and that's how you give players information, right? So that's we talk about exposition dumps as being a bad thing, and sometimes they are. So the person steps forward, the NPC, and they rattle off the entire backstory and history of this world and this character and their quest, and 10 minutes later you're like, okay, now you can go, right? So exposition is a challenge, and it's part of, I think, growing as a DM is how you use exposition. In terms of using it well and using it in a way that really engages the players. Because you got to give them information, but how do you do it? All right. And ideally, this is going to happen naturally. It'll happen as the players progress slowly through the story, so you don't just dump it all on them at the one time.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to.
Sometimes you have to.
But ideally, like, they'll talk to this NPC, get a little bit of the story here, like through natural conversation, and then they might find this book over here where they have a few pages from a diary that give them a little more information. But sometimes your players just are oblivious to that stuff and they miss all the points.
And you got to throw a plot wrench at them. Like, okay, the building down there, you see it's on fire.
Go there.
Go there. It's on fire. Right?
Yeah. Let's see.
Skipping through that a little bit.
Moving on.
Yep.
Side quests.
All right. We do need to talk about side quests. So side quests are just fun little adventures you can slip in, just little things to help create more role-playing situations, to help the characters define themselves, to help build out and enhance the world. Side quests do a lot of great stuff. But you do want to be careful with them, like with our group, which we'll do every one, just so they can check it off, right?
Well, that's something we've learned as a DM. Again, it was like, oh, let's hide the main quest as a side quest. We've learned that about our group, so they were stagnating. I'm like, okay, we need to stop side questing, so we stuck the main quest in the storyboard, side quest board. And, or also, what was I going to say? Our group likes to create side quests. So with the big giant black space dragon, it was feeding off of the trap souls of a city it had absorbed 1,000 years earlier. And that's where it got a lot of its powers from. So they tried to create this way. Like, well, what happens if we release some of those souls and free them so they can go on to the afterlife and be free? Would that change the combat? I'm like, well, we hadn't even thought of that. But we're like, hey, that's a great idea. You can certainly try that.
Sure. Yes,
so they actually succeeded it. So we adjusted the final battle accordingly. But that was technically a side quest. That wasn't where we intended them to go. But, you know, so sometimes you can use side quests to move your game forward, your actual plot forward, and sometimes it makes it more engaging, more fun, and then your players feel like they did more cool things. And that's always fun, too.
And sometimes, especially in a serious campaign, a side quest is a great way to add a little humor. It'll break it up a little bit. We had one side quest, it was called Kill My Raz. That was it. Kill my Raz.
Like, throw back to the original.
Throw back to the original. They had to go kill some rats.
And they had way too much fun with that.
Oh, they had so much fun killing those rats.
They subsequently picked up a side quest from the same person to
kill my ghosts.
Kill his ghosts. There were rats in the basement, and then he had ghosts in the attic. But those it was just designed to be more of a fun, lighthearted thing. So he based
the ghosts were based on the Three Stooges, yeah. And so they thought they were fixing things. They weren't. And they spent half the time slapping each other. It was great. It was great. Okay, pacing. Let's move on to pacing. Okay.
So plots and pacing tend to be really kind of intertwined. So we've probably talked about a lot of this stuff already, but to separate it out.
But yeah, what is pacing? In role-playing games, pacing is the mixing of the elements of the game to keep things interesting, right? So an 8-hour combat, can drag, right? So pacing is mixing things up with different elements. So what are the components of pacing? We got role-playing, all right? We have combat. We got puzzles. We got skill challenges. I love skill challenges. That was one of the coolest. I think 4th edition added that. Was it 4th edition? I don't know. I don't remember. But it was awesome. I'm like, this was the coolest idea ever. Hey, the rest of 4th edition didn't have that kind of cool stuff. Sorry.
It was not our favorite game.
It was not my favorite edition.
Okay, to be fair, 4th edition worked better with smaller groups. We usually play on average with about 10 players. So combat drug so much with 4th edition.
Yeah. Then it required minis.
So also pacing is impacted by the number of players.
Yeah, pacing is impacted.
We intentionally put less combat in our games because when you're playing with that many people, a round of combat takes a while. So that's going to make the game slow down the moment we put that in there. Mm-hmm. So number of players, the things your players like to do impact it. Our players like to side quest a lot. So we probably could have finished that Dragon Voltron game in a lot less than 3 years, but it took them that long.
It did. And so sometimes you've got players who really like role-playing, so they're going to want more of that. Sometimes you have players who just want to vent some steam. I want to kill some goblins. I don't care. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure. There's a princess. I don't care. Let me kill some goblins. Right?
I mean, that's why it's called Dungeons and Dragons. You go into the dungeon, you kill things. That's the point of it.
But there are other role-playing games out there, and they have other focuses as well. But mixing it up, pacing is really impacted by mixing it up. And so even if you have players that prefer heavily combat, it's good to slip in some of these others, even if it's a small element to it. Because even with combat, mix it up.
Yeah.
We made some mistakes. We had one campaign where it was just nothing but lizardmen in the dungeon, and after a while they got tired of killing lizardmen. There's a reason why we randomly find weird things in those funhouse dungeons. It's like, and in this room, you find lizardmen. And in this room, you find
Death Trap.
And in this room, you find, what's another monster? You find a Tarrasque.
Why?
Because you just killed lizardmen. We're not going to put them over here again. Right?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, changing it up. Our 8-hour big siege combat was actually broken into several different sections, several different waves, and there were different elements of things attacking them. So they had to actually change up their strategy every round or so to keep, and it kept it progressing. It kept it interesting.
Oh, we got to talk about the Gladiator Combat.
Oh, yeah. That was, so we added a steel dragon. That's not a real thing. It wasn't a thing. We made it up. It was just a dragon with lots of pointy serrated things on it, and it liked to fight. So it ran a gladiator arena. And when the players got there, they're like, great, an arena. We're going to have to participate in the combat. This is going to be so boring, line combat.
They beat this person, then beat the next person.
Well, I changed up the combat system for that. I designed a system that was actually based more off of charisma and Worldwide Wrestling Federation. So half of it was fake, and the goal was to actually make it look really cool. And you could only actually try to attack the person if you first made a performance check. And then they had to describe what they were doing. And it actually became really fun. In a couple of rounds, people started betting on them. They started shipping one of our player characters with one of the NPCs they were fighting. It turned into this epic thing, and they went to try to steal the dragon amulet so they could summon the steel dragon mecha. They got caught, and then they didn't find out what happened, and they were actually really upset that they didn't get to finish.
We wanted to do the Worldwide Wrestling game here.
So there's ways to change up like your standard combat to make it interesting, especially if you're like, well, it makes sense for this character to have this arena style combat, but if you just keep doing the same kind of combat, it's kind of boring.
And so you need to think about pacing in terms of micro pacing and macro pacing. Micro pacing is your individual adventure, the one session, that one game, right? And so you're going to want to think about what kind of mixing you can do in that one. Now, I'm not going to give you 70% combat and 30% fight. It depends on your players. It really does. And the kind of adventure you're in, right, in terms of how you mix it up. But I do encourage you to mix it up. Think about micro pacing, but also think macro pacing, right? If you're running a big campaign, right, how is it going to flow third or fourth game in, right? Or fifth game in, or in the case of that dragon campaign, 20th game in, right?
You're going to make sure you are giving them enough information, enough different things to do that it stays interesting.
They feel like they're moving towards their goal. They're not stagnating, right? Even in those longer campaigns, they should always be at least making some progress towards that main goal, even if it's a little bit, even if it's just a tiny, tiny bit. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think comparing pacing, we could talk about that game. I had 2 dragons. I designed the maps. I like designing big, complicated maps. For the green one, it ended up being
Awful.
too big. It drug. There was a little expedition because this was this Cambodian-style temple area with ruins. And then there were some paintings on the walls that showed a little bit of the Dragon Knights from the mecha stuff.
Give backstory.
So it gave them a little bit of backstory. They liked that, but the rest of it just drug. The next one they went to was equally large. It took them 3 8-hour sessions to get through it, but there were different elements of it. So where the other one was just really it was all just this Cambodian-style temple ruins you're going through. This other one, you had this temple built into the side of a cliff here, and so they had living area where monks used to live that they were exploring and had been turned into ruins, where they found actually where the Dragon Knights had used to live. So they found their personal quarters. So they'd found little bits more of information, but the whole underneath of it was this catacombs with this mummy lord that was running havoc and had stuff in the upstairs too. But it was like they were 2 different types of areas, and I think that made it a little interesting.
Actually, that's one thing we found with combat in particular, is pacing in combat, is one of the hardest things to manage. However, having that kind of layered combat where things change at round 4, boom, something new enters the room, or round 4, the monster drops, but then gets up and gets bigger.
Yeah, I mean, technically they fought that mummy lord 3 times.
They did.
The first time was a simulacrum, and they actually had an NPC mercenary group that helped them fight it, and because they were trying to get this magical axe it had. Well, it turns out that one was a fake because it wasn't a real one. The NPC mercenary group left because they're like, well, that sucked. But then they found a secret door behind the throne, and they got down to this other area, and then they fought him again and barely survived. And then you hear this laugh, and we cut to a cutscene where the sarcophagus opens, the mummy lord comes out, grabs our paladin, who's sitting in the audience over there, and threw him into a pit of snakes. He took enough damage to drop to 0 hit points. He's now making death saves in a pit of aggressive snakes.
And then combat began. Roll initiative.
For the next round.
Cutscenes are challenging.
And we made it a little more powerful because this was the actual Mummy Lord.
Yeah. Last thing I want to say about pacing is cutscenes. So cutscenes are a way of giving exposition. They do take away some player agency, right? And so all your players are going to be okay with the big baddie coming out and giving their big baddie speech. Let me tell you why I'm destroying the world, blah, 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 blah. Or are they just going to say, I shoot him in the head? I don't want to hear it. Right? Cutscenes are fun. You do want to keep them short. Key story information, but
I mean, if you can work it in and it works with your players, it can make it more dramatic. As far as I know, our paladin was okay with us possibly murdering his character in a cutscene, but it turns out they saved him, so he didn't die. But maybe that helped.
All right, let's move on to Perpetrators, our last one here. Okay, so we got our
plots, theme, pacing.
Now we got our bad guy. Or bad girl, or whatever, right?
So the interesting thing, he likes starting with the theme and the plot. I like starting with the villain and the character. I always start with the character, and then I build everything around that.
So your villains are your antagonists, okay?
Yes.
And so an antagonist doesn't have to be evil. If you got a group of good, or if you got a group of evil all your players playing evil characters, a paladin, a lawful good paladin, makes a great antagonist. Going after him.
Yeah, it's basically someone or a character or a NPC or whatever whose goals
are in direct conflict with the player or the game goal.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever the players want to do, the villain wants to do the opposite.
Or something different.
That
puts them in opposition.
Mm-hmm. Right? So that you need to start with that. Think about that. What is your villain's goal? And how can it be an opposed to the players? Their individual goals, their personal goals, or the game goal, right? Right, and that helps them make them be a little bit more fleshed out. Once you got their goal, then think of their power. Okay.
Because a good villain has a good power base. I mean, if they don't have that power base, they can have all of these lofty ideals of how they're going to destroy the world. But if they can't follow through with it, they're not a threat. Right. So they also do need to be a threat to your players.
They need to be a threat. So you can have physical power. Tarrasque makes great physical power. You're not going to negotiate with the Tarrasque.
You could have supernatural magical power like a lich, or some high-level spellcaster that wants to summon. They like to summon.
Now, if you really feel like mixing things up, you could give them economic power.
Yeah.
They have money.
Batman.
Maybe they're Batman, or maybe they just hired an army, right? Or maybe they're the evil mayor of the town, right? So they've got economic power.
Yeah, so they can hire other things with power,
or social
or
power.
buy all the
very
cool toys.
Convincing, right? Like maybe they're a cult leader. That's a good one, right? So, and in our games we had lots of them. Let's move here from that one. And
well, and sometimes your villains, like, we can use some of the things like that Still Dragon when we were talking about the Colosseum. He wasn't really evil. I mean, he probably was if you wanted to break down the alignment, but
he just wanted a good fight.
He really just wanted a good fight. He got in there and he was like, "Oh, that was so much fun." When he was dying, like he was like, "That was worth."
Laughing and crying. And
he was
saying,
like, "That was
beautiful.
This was
more." Yeah. You're like, "You're a masochist." Yes.
But he was like, "I'm okay with dying to this group because that fight was worth it."
They almost didn't want to kill him, but they did anyway.
They did actually take over the Colosseum as a business venture with the con artist, and her husband actually did that, and then they put his head up on the wall to like commemorate it for the dragon.
So you got a goal, right? You got power. Next thing to think about is their personality, and this is where you get to be creative and fun, right? You want to make your villain memorable. Give them a good personality. And you can have, any personality out there. Honestly, players love it when they get to really interact with the villain. They do. Sometimes they like just smashing the golem in the head. Great. Okay, great. That's fine. But if they can have some witty banter with them, even better.
Yeah. So in that dragon game, they fought all kinds of dragons. They fought lots of big, bad, actually evil things. The most memorable villain from that was actually a side villain. It was a serial killer I wrote in as a level 20 bard that would charm people. Gave it the vampire's ability to charm, but it was audible based, so if you could hear it, you'd be charmed instead of line of sight. And she was a serial killer. That was meant to be a sign.
They hated that character and they loved that character. They really did. Because she was so friendly and sweet and is psychotic and evil. She's like, oh, you're so wonderful. And then she'd stab them in the back.
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful personality. And so you can have fun. We had another one that was a lot of fun. It was a purple dragon, and that one was basically, what would Deadpool be like if you were a dragon?
So the dragon broke the fourth wall. We started the game.
Broke the fourth wall and messed with your character sheets.
They're like, I want to tell a good story. Okay, so you're going to be the hero, but tieflings do not make good heroes. You need to be a human paladin.
You're not human.
Warlock does not look like a hero.
I took his character sheet, crossed out, put human. He went, what? Passed it back. Don't worry, you'll get it back.
I mean, most of them ran with it, and it ended up being really fun and very silly. The only way to beat it was to actually describe a really cool attack.
That was
so
it.
Just rolling an attack, going, I attack, I stab it. No, you had to give this epic, all right, this is going to end here, and like roll this dice, and then say what you're going to do, and then it died. And it gave this really long monologue, thanking several of the players for their past time together, but our players ran with it because they were like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't remember this incident, but sure. I'll take that out of your will. Sure. So, you're going to leave this to me.
Personality. Right. Great place to finish up. Okay, but then let's talk about villain loss. What do you do to get rid of your villain? As DMs, sometimes we can get really attached to our villains. We don't, especially if we're like, well, I love this personality. We don't want them to die. Death. When your villain loses, death is a way to go. And my recommendation is don't get too overly attached to a villain. Let them die. If the players want to kill that villain, let them die. This works well, particularly if the villain particularly offends the players. It can be very satisfying for them. Redemption. What if the villain says, I'm willing to be good. I'm willing to change. Works great in anime, but I don't know.
I don't know. Our serial killer changed sides. She was working for the big black evil dragon, and she's like, I see him losing.
I'm going to switch sides.
So she switched sides, the players. And a few of them were like, I kind of want to kill her now because she's here and available. But they're like, but she's not doing anything evil right now. And she says she's behaving.
I don't know why they trusted her.
They did not kill her.
Away. The villain can always run away. This is, a bit anticlimactic. This does not work at the end of an adventure. It works well in a campaign if you're going to bring the villain back. But at the end of an adventure, if the villain runs, it's not nearly as good unless it's funny in some way. Like we had one game where the villain got cursed into a cat. So the villain was it was a pirate captain, and now he was a pirate cat. They called him Captain Kitty. And he ran. And they were okay with that because he was now a cat.
We were kind of too busy laughing to take it seriously.
They were too busy laughing to do anything else.
I mean, to be fair, it was not intentional.
No.
We were going after a violin artifact thing, and he got to it first. Well, it turns out it was cursed. And we didn't know that, so he got the curse. And that's how he became a cat. And we're like, he probably just saved us a lot of trouble.
The villain could always surrender and, be willing to take whatever punishment comes up to them, right?
And then your players can decide whether they kill them or not then. They put down their weapons and go like, we give up, you win.
And my advice here is allow multiple ways to beat the villain, right? I think that's a lot of fun, depending on where your players want to go. If they want to kill him, kill him. If they want to let him leave and come back later, okay. Right? But multiple ways for them to defeat the villain, not just punch them in the head, right? Yeah. If there's a way that they can talk the villain down, let them.
It's like kind of as a dungeon master, it's about being flexible. You give them this thing and then let your players decide how they're going to handle it. And they may come up with stuff you never even considered. And so be open to the idea that, okay, that might actually be fun. Whatever they come up with, even if it's not what you had in mind. Or random, like with the thing where they wanted to release the souls for the Black Dragon. That was not something we considered, but
You know,
That sounds narratively fun. Let's go with it.
you can weaken it before you have to fight it.
Sometimes they can come up with great ideas for your bad guys that you didn't think of either, because they'll be sitting there planning and plotting, and they'll be like, I'll bet he's going to do this. And you're like, I didn't think of that. They should do that.
You don't have to tell them that they came up with the ideas.
And then they feel accomplished for having figured out your plan ahead of time.
Right. All right, I want to move on to epic D&D failures because we're down to our last few minutes here.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so where did we mess up? So, because I want to help you learn from our mistakes.
Okay.
We played for a long time. We've run a number of different campaigns, and we have had games where things sucked. And when I say failures, it's usually failure in the sense that somebody didn't have fun. Because in the end, role-playing is about having fun. You're trying to co-create a fun experience with your players. And so when somebody doesn't have fun, then it's a failure, either on your part or on their part.
And some of these are just management failures. Like I already mentioned, we gave our in our dragon game, we gave our players the entire map and said, "Here, have at it." I regret that.
I do regret that.
That made my life a lot harder.
Because they wanted to go to every single dungeon.
And we should have curated. I mean, initially there were a lot of them because we do have upwards of 10 to 12 players, and we weren't sure exactly who was going to be coming to that. So we wanted a chance for everyone who wanted a mecha to have a mecha, because who wants to be the one left out of that? Nobody. But then our group ended up shifting, people's schedules changed, so we didn't end up with as many. And if we had curated that a little better, we probably could have cut that down and not had to work quite so hard.
Another mistake we made was having intelligent monsters in one campaign and not warning our players. So in one of the games that we played, we were co-DMing. She was running the game, I was running the villains. And I was running them smart.
I mean, that worked really well because he had time to actually consider the player's actions and make an intelligent response to it.
But
a lot of times as a dungeon master, you can't do that.
They wanted to play it like a video game. So they go in. So they approach the dungeon like a video game. I go into this room and I kill everyone there, and I go to the next room and I kill everyone there. Well, some of the ones in there ran and got help, and they got surrounded, and they lost
pretty badly.
Very badly, because they just wanted to plow through the dungeon, and I'm like, you're fighting against a group of very intelligent creatures that are going to coordinate their battles, and they just did, and they know this place.
Yeah, they weren't prepared for that.
They weren't prepared for that.
So that was bad communication on our part.
That was bad communication on our part. We should have said, by the way, we're going to run this as if these villain monsters are intelligent and not just kill, kill, kill.
Yeah. So that's good, but that ended up being a very frustrating situation for our players. Mm-hmm. I mean, we worked it out of it and kept it kind of fun, but it was not. It was a very, very frustrating end to that session.
It was. Another mistake, I'm bad about this. I like to make complicated stories. And so sometimes they can be too complicated. So I made a mystery where there were clues, and
we missed half the clues.
And they missed half the clues and didn't understand the rest of them. And so I wasn't sure where to take them because they were going nowhere.
So yeah, that's frustrating because sometimes he likes doing puzzles. As players, we don't always like puzzles. Sometimes we're into puzzles, and some days we just really don't want to do puzzles.
There are days where we just all want to be the butt kicker.
Murder hobo. And never
especially after COVID. Or during COVID. Our first game after COVID
started, it was all online, and all our players wanted to do was go in and kill all the things.
Yeah, they did.
They wanted to release that frustration.
We had these Yeti, and they had like tribes, and each tribe had their own little culture, and they just plowed through them all.
It was genocide.
They did not care.
And you know what? That's okay in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. It would have got them arrested otherwise. Yeah. One last thing, one last mistake. Never underestimate the lunatic player.
Yeah.
Never underestimate the
some of our
player.
Worst party wipes and moments where and players that are still kind of mad at us were when they did something kind of like dumb, but it was in the name, they were just being silly. They really didn't mean anything bad or big to come from it, and it ended up ending really badly.
Yeah. No matter how many times we told them, "Are you sure?" Yes. Now I'm doubly sure.
Because, I mean, some of them are just curious. So we want to see what happens if we push the big red button.
Yeah.
And we really don't want them to push the big red button, but they're going to.
So sometimes giving them choices that are clearly stupid,
they
still
will
take the stupid choice.
And then you end up, if you follow the natural consequences from that, well, that kind of ruins your game, actually, because then people are not having fun. They're really frustrated and upset.
So never underestimate the loony.
So know your players, too.
Know your players.
Knowing your players is a big thing with this.
All right. Well, that wraps up what we have to say. So I want to thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
We do have a few minutes left, so we can answer a few questions. But I'll give you, those of you who want to leave, we'll give you a chance to clap for us. Thank you all. And again, we're doing another panel in 30 minutes on parenting the toxic player. You are more than welcome to join us for that one. But otherwise, questions. We're going to open the floor. We have a few minutes here. We can answer some questions.
Yeah,
What we talked about, or our thoughts or ideas, or I'm kind of curious.
Hush. Let her ask a question.
Question.
Yeah, I had a question. How do you address player agency and sudden shifts of their own? Because I've had situations where I have with a battle or something, like this enemy is supposed to be serious, and they engage with the conversation a little bit. And I find that while I love like players doing like fun sudden changes, half the time it's convenient. And so if you're doing a serious game, you just kind of like roll with it and just be like, okay, this is just going to be funny now, or how do you?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
It is. I find it works best though if we just roll with it, because
if that's what the players want, if they want to have just a silly game, then let's run with it. But we might, and some of those serious elements that I care about, I'll put them aside, and we just won't do them right now.
Yeah. So it's a bit about flexibility. I also feel like my role as a dungeon master isn't necessarily just to play the bad guys, and I'm the like representing them. My goal is to coordinate and narrate a really good game or a good story that involves the players. In fact, it's mostly the player story. They're the heroes of the story, and so we're managing that and directing that into
enabling it
and enabling that to be fun. And that's how we actually end up getting some of the best stories, the ones that we remember and retell over and over again when we get together at our games. It's like, oh yeah, you remember when that happened? It comes from those situations and just going, okay, this isn't what I had in mind, but let's work with it.
Yeah. They still talk about the barbecue incident.
Barbecue pig incident.
Yeah. It's one of their favorite stories.
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you what it is. No, go ahead.
What is your opinion for the best way of trying to encourage players to not take 8 to 9 minutes for their turn? Because I have a lot of players that will end up sitting there
That
distracted.
is an enormous challenge.
And online, it's even more fun. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Pacing in terms of player turns are, and this is one of the things where they'll hum and they'll haw and they're like, what's the best choice? What's the best choice? And you're like,
Now, this is a problem we've struggled with for a very long time, starting with 10 players. You finish your turn, it's the next person's turn. By the time it gets around to that person again, they're on their phone, they're disengaging from the game. So it's really hard to keep them engaged, paying attention enough to be thinking about what they're going to do next. That is a really hard thing to do.
So one thing we have tried, and making this clear at the onset, like, hey, let's do a timer-based thing. You have a minute to do your turn. If you don't do your turn during that minute, we're going to move to the next person. And just make that kind of the general rule. And we'll be flexible with it if there's still, it's a minute,
we've
20
done
seconds.
that. Something that worked really well in our dragon game, because we did have the 2 DMs, we would have one person like kind of coordinating everything and managing the game itself. Like, okay, your turn, next up is going to be you, and you be ready. And then we go to that person's turn. So it's like we're letting them know you're next, be ready, so that we can keep the thing moving again, especially since we have a larger group. That has helped.
And sometimes it's the challenge is figuring out why is it delayed. Is it because the person just has too many powers? Maybe that particular player needs to play a fighter, and not the wizard.
I mean, that's a joke, but I mean, 4th edition, everybody had all of these powers, and there were all these different kinds of things you could do. And after a while, they're like, okay, the battle changed a little bit. Maybe I need to do this one, and then you have to read them all, and
Yeah,
It took.
I think that was my biggest concern about 4th edition is basically everybody had to have the player's handbook in front of them in order to actually remember what they were supposed to be able to do.
Yeah, and even then it was still complicated.
And even then it was still complicated. But yeah, with those players that take a long time, I try to gently guide them into classes that are really easy, that don't have a whole lot of options. And they tend to find those more fun because then they're not as challenged themselves.
I mean, that ties into player types too, because if they have trouble making decisions with lots of abilities and lots of powers, that's actually going to become a frustration to them, because then they're going to feel pressure to make a decision faster and they're not ready for it. It ends up becoming a frustration.
Yeah.
Just from what we found, they end up feeling put on the spot, and that's not fun. Nobody likes that.
Nah. One more question, then we got to wrap things up. Go ahead.
Which one? There were several of
There
them.
were 2 of them back there. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to ask how you guys handle adjusting pacing and encounters when you have a massive difference in character power or usefulness between characters and
Come to our next panel. Is my recommendation on that.
That's actually something that gets addressed a little bit in different player types and toxicity.
Yeah.
Because that can end up being a very toxic environment. Because do you tailor your monster for the more min-max powerful character so that it's not dying in one shot in one round? Or do you make it a little easier so that your other players can actually have a chance to hit it, do some stuff, but yet still dies to the min-max player?
I'm in a campaign, I'm not speaking campaign, but I'm in a 35 campaign right now. And we're very much in that class. One of the players has figured out how to one-shot basically everything. And
They are One Punch Man.
the only way the DM has been able to figure out how to counter that, and ironically, was putting the big bad that doesn't on the stairs, because we couldn't do one attack when Kennedy was there.
Yeah.
But it led to our party.
Every battle is on a stair.
Yeah, that would get awkward really
That does
quickly.
get awkward very quickly. So you got a power gamer who's messing up the pacing of it.
And it's not so much we're trying to be toxic or trying to do what we want, just that happens to be something different.
Yeah, so the pacing, it's just moving through it too quickly, and nobody else is getting a chance to play. Yeah, that's tough to deal with.
That is tough to deal with. So how big is the party? 7 people. Okay. So one way to do it, if your DM's open to this, is split the party. You know? That is one way. Have one group go one direction, have another group go another direction.
I mean, typically that's discouraged, because then you've got to split your one dungeon master, splitting their attention between 2
It helps if
groups.
you have 2 dungeon masters on that.
That has actually been a mechanic we worked in with 2 games. So Spelljammer, we actually built dungeons with the intention of splitting the party, where I'd take one group, they'd take another group, they get 1 minute of cell phone time because of communicators, and otherwise you couldn't talk to the other group and know what they were doing. But you each had stuff to accomplish that could, depended on the other group. That was fun. But splitting the group is awkward.
That
Yeah,
is
when you
an
have
awkward
one DM, because it's still splitting the group, and
It is
you may
awkward.
still end up with one person, but it may mean that they could go do this thing with this other player, and then the others could go do something else, so that they could have a chance to shine.
My advice for that game master, that GM, is to mix up the campaign, the battles. So instead of just having one enemy that they fight each and every time, so that the One Punch Man takes it out, multiple enemies in different directions coming from different locations that require different skill sets to defeat, is one way to get that. Give your other players a chance to shine.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, that would be how I would approach that.
Yeah, more enemies.
Having learned
different
from
powers.
mistakes, because I had the same thing, and I made a mistake on this one. I just kept pumping the power of the monsters until the point, the lower level part, they couldn't even touch them.
Or the less min-maxed.
The less min max, they just couldn't do it, and it didn't work well. And so that was a mistake, and one that I learned from. Don't do that. Is I just kept making them more and more powerful. All right, okay, you can punch it in one turn. Now it's going to take 6, but they can't do anything now. So, but I think we're out of time here, because we do need to get ready for our next panel. Thank you all for coming, and if
if you'd like to see us in 20 minutes, be upstairs.